Video's good. All right, TR. I want to start by just saying thank you for your service. Thank you for sitting down with me today and talking about what you've done and everything like that. If you could start with just which branch of service you joined, and then when you were in and when you got out.
Yeah. My name is T.R. Shaw. I'm from Battle Creek. I grew up here. Went to school here. I went through Battle Creek Central and went on to Central Michigan University, where I was a journalism student. Worked for our student paper, and I was heavily into journalism. And I got interested in the Navy. I'd been interested in the Navy in high school, and then through college I kind of kept in touch with that. And then as I graduated with a degree in journalism in the early 80s, the job market wasn't real good. And I said, well, I thought I would go into Navy public affairs. And so I looked into it and talked to a recruiter, and I decided to become go into the Navy as an officer with my college degree and pursue public affairs in the military. But little did I know that that was the smallest community in the Navy at the time. Very few people knew much about it. Post-Vietnam, public affairs was seen kind of as a propaganda area, and it was still a growing community, but we were right on the cusp of the information age, so there was opportunities there. And what kind of also attracted me to it at the time in the early 80s is Ronald Reagan was building a 600-ship Navy. And so the opportunities there were just massive for doing things and for doing, getting involved and becoming part of a growing Navy and a growing military, and really being part of something big. So I pursued that. A little did I know that I had to, my recruiter and I listened to, we really didn't know a whole lot about public affairs, directed me to go into surface warfare. And so I went through commissioning at Officer Candidate School, got commissioned as an ensign, and then the plan was to go in, do your time in surface warfare, get qualified, and go cross over afterwards, because that's the way at the time. He didn't know about direct commissions into public affairs at the time. I wished I'd known about that, because that's probably what I would have done. So I kind of took the hard route of getting to public affairs, going through normal line officer training and going to a ship and being a surface warfare officer, which in the end was probably the best thing I could have done to be a public affairs officer, because it gave me the background in the Navy. And you come in as a direct commission, you have to learn everything about all the rates, but actually being there, experiencing it, and really being part of the action, and then becoming a public affairs officer is much more beneficial to being a public affairs officer. So in the end, when I finally got into the public affairs community, I had a lot of background and a lot of experience in the fleet, which was something that was a real advantage to being a public affairs officer. However, that road was a little convoluted. I said I was a journalism major, and I went to OCS and went through that, and I struggled through that. A lot of the people that were pursuing the Navy at the time were hard-charging people who had dreams of becoming ship commanders. A lot of them had engineering backgrounds, technical backgrounds, and I guess when I say I was journalism and more of a liberal arts background, so I was learning things like thermodynamics and navigation, and all the intricacies of that was it was a real challenge for me. So, but I struggled through, and I made it through OCS, and then went on through Surface Warfare School. Struggled, but because of my class standing, which wasn't real high at OCS, on billet selection night, you get selected. You get picked your ships by your class standing, and in surface warfare, all the ships were put on a big board, and the first head of the class goes in and picks their ship, and of course the top of the class took the battleships. At that time, the Iowa, the New Jersey, Missouri were all put back online, the Wisconsin, all four of those battleships were coming back, being rebuilt. So the top of the class went to the big battleships, which really cool. Then it went on down to the combatants. From there, he went to the destroyers, the cruisers, and then went on to the auxiliaries and the service ships and all that, depending on your class standing. Well, my class standing was pretty low. I was literally the second from last in my class, but I did graduate. And but when I got down there to build a selection night, my choices were pretty limited. I literally had a choice between an aircraft carrier and a tugboat in Bahrain. And in hindsight, the tugboat might have been probably a better career thing, because I probably would have been part of an elite small crew. But I wanted the excitement, the aircraft carrier, and I figured here's going to be doing things and be doing a lot more. And so as a young aspiring surface warfare officer, I went to had orders to the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, my first ship, which was against the advice of people. Says, oh, you don't want to go to a carrier. That's that's an aviation platform. They don't it's really hard to get surface warfare there, and it was. I struggled with it. I got through it. Got beat up on watches. Had to fight for watches. Just to give you an idea of the scope of an aircraft carrier, it's a very exciting platform. An Ike is a great ship, but it's a huge crew. There's 5,000 people on board. Half of that's air wing. It's all run by aviators. The captain and everybody are all seasoned aviators who have gone in the community. Every department head was a captain. And so we got really a high-ranking, high-level ship. And actually, in the wardroom itself, amongst us in the ship's company, we had 56 lieutenant commanders, and I was just a young, lowly ensign coming on board there. So it was a real struggle to do that. And on top of that, you had not only did you have the surface ensigns, you had frequently, since it was a nuclear carrier, you had young nuclear ensigns that came out of nuclear school to work in the engineering department. So we had just a whole big mix of officers of all kinds. You had aviators, you had nuclear engineers, you had the surface people, you had intelligence people, you had all kinds. So it was quite a community, which was probably, to really get an education on the Navy, it was a great place to be, an exciting place to be, but it was really a hard place to be a junior officer, especially a brand newly minted, what they call butter bar, going into in the Navy. So I got there, struggled through it, and then went on a couple of Mediterranean cruises. One of the exciting things we did on one of our first cruises is we went over and took part in the 40th anniversary of D-Day in 1984. And being that Ike was one of the namesake ships, we had the Ike, the Montgomery, and a couple other ships with namesake ships that were named after people from that era. And we got to go over, we had a port call in Portsmouth, England, in early June, and then on June 6th we crossed the English Channel and anchored off of Normandy, and we got to go ashore on D-Day and got to tour Normandy and do that, and our commanding officer took part in the ceremony. And we also hosted at the time, President Reagan came aboard. Well, he was supposed to come aboard, but he didn't. Timing didn't work out, but we did have a reception set up for the president to visit the ship. But timing didn't make it, so we missed an opportunity to have President Reagan on board the ship. But that was really an exciting experience and something that we did, something I always treasure. And it was just a neat thing to be able to walk the beach in Normandy on D-Day and to do that. That was one of the highlights of my career. But stayed with Ike a little bit later. But going back when I first arrived on Ike, just I'm part of the tour before that, my first tour, which is probably, I got on there and took a long flight from Norfolk over to the Mediterranean. At the time, Ike was stationed off the coast of Normandy in an area called Bagel Station, and the ship had been there probably about almost 2.5 months on station, flying surveillance over Lebanon. And we were, when I got there, I was there for the last 30 days of that long deployment, where we were flying surveillance, doing intelligence and all that. And then we finally, after the ship had been on station for just over 96 days, and they finally got a break to go to Naples. So we left the station and went to Naples, and I stood my very first import quarterdeck watch at anchor. And during that first watch that I had, there were rumors floating around about something happened back in Lebanon. So during that first watch, the XO came down and ordered a recall of the ship. So we had to initiate a recall on my first watch, and we all got together and got everybody on board, and within 4 hours we got the ships back. We got most of the crew back, turned the ship around. We went for the quarterdeck watch up to the bridge. The XO actually got the ship underway, and we left Naples Harbor at flank speed going south, and the commander of the ship was in Rome at the time when the recall came down, and the helicopter picked him up, and as we were leaving the Naples Harbor, he arrived on the ship and took back command. So the XO got the ship underway, and we went through the Straits of Messina at flank speed. This is the time what we've happened is that the Marines were attacked in Lebanon, and the embassy was blown up, and we were ready to go. We'd heard that there had been mass casualties of Marines. There'd been a huge attack, and we were ready to fight. And I do remember what was interesting about that is standing a bridge watch as we were heading back toward Lebanon across the Mediterranean, and we had F-14s on the deck, fully loaded, ready to go, and it was called Alert 5, and which meant that the pilots were sitting in the plane in a warm Mediterranean night, the canopies open. One of the pilots looked down. One of the pilots was reading a book. The other one was in the back snoozing. But they were ready to go, and we were ready to attack. So we heard that something bad had happened to the Marines. And during that transit back, we found out that 222 Marines were blown up when the embassy was attacked by a truck bomb. And that was probably about the only time I really experienced war nerves. We were ready to fight. We were ready to go, but the problem is it was a truck bomb. And who do you attack? Who do you do? So we went back to Bagel Station. We cruised around, and had an endless cycle of probably 2 weeks of loading and unloading planes, and never once launched a strike. And it was really kind of frustrating because everybody wanted to do something, but what can we do? And it was just that was one of the first really major volleys in the war on terrorism. And how do you fight? How does an aircraft carrier bring power to something as simple as a truck bomb? And so we're dealing in tribal warfare with high technology, and how do you do that? And so we had to kind of threw us back on the curve and had to step back. Well, that cruise ended. We came back to Norfolk, and then the next, so after we came back, then we came back, and that was when we went to Normandy and did Lebanon, did the 40th anniversary. So I had 2 major tours on Ike over there, doing around the Mediterranean, and doing that, going to the North Atlantic, taking part in D-Day and Lebanon. So it's an exciting tour for 2 years on there. And then what happened is that Ike decided to go, well, didn't decide to go, but it went in for a complex overhaul. So by the time we got back, it had been through a lot, had been under arduous service for several years, and it was time to get the ship refitted, rebuilt. So Ike was going into the shipyard for probably more than a year, and it's called COH, or complex overhaul. And at that time, I still hadn't gotten qualified, and so I had to make a decision. I could either stay with the ship and work through the shipyard and just be part of the ship and do that, or I had an opportunity to call a cross deck and go to another ship so I could get underway again and continue my quals. And so I got my detailer sent me in. I went to an amphibious ship. I was transferred over. It's called the USS Charleston, which was an amphibious assault ship. It's called an amphibious cargo ship, is what it's called, and they call it the Cadillac of the Amphibs. It had 70-ton booms on it. It had big holes on it. It carries all the gear for amphibious landing, trucks, tanks. It has boats. It has it's quite the amphibious amphibious delivery ship and also carried a contingent of Marines. But amphibious warfare at the time was a dying, really with our mission within today's technology. It was an antiquated mission. Doing an amphibious landing at some place that didn't have any facilities were probably not going to happen. So we just continued our mission. We did loaded and unloaded the ship a few times, went to the Mediterranean, took part in an amphibious support group, did that, and came back. It was a tough career. We had some real personnel problems on it. We had a little bit different pace. It was a little bit different level of professionalism than the carrier was, and it wasn't really a good. It wasn't a very good time. It was not something I really enjoyed as much as I did at the carrier. And by that time, I was ready. I had my 4 years in, and I was ready to transfer, say, either stay, do something else, or go back to civilian life. And at that point, I decided, well, I went to a reserve seminar and learned about the reserves. So I came back, left active duty, and stayed in my reserve status. And came back actually to Battle Creek, and I came to the Battle Creek Reserve Center. And here I was as a young lieutenant now, and I think I'm coming home to my hometown reserve center. I said, hey, I'm probably going to have some seniority there. This is probably going to be, a good place to be, because I can probably have, really do something there as a reservist and all that. And I stepped on the drill deck here in Battle Creek on the first day, and I came to find out that at that time it was one of the best reserve centers in the Midwest, but it also had some pretty elite units. We had a NATO unit, we had 3 medical units, we had a Panama unit, and all of them were primarily staff units, and most staff units are senior enlisted and senior officers. So my first drill day in Battle Creek, this young lieutenant, and I look across the drill deck and I just see this sea of gold. I mean, it's like captains, commanders, high-ranking chiefs, and all this stuff. And I'm going, oh my God, I'm junior again. And it was like so much for that. But I found out that the reserve was really top-heavy in the fact that a lot of the senior people who have left active duty and want to finish their careers. But it was really a pretty exciting place to be. So I came in my reserve duty, and my first job I had, I was with since I came from an amphib and I had some amphibious experience, I became the executive officer of Amphibious Construction Battalion 2, FIB CB unit. And what that unit does is it's a unit made up of primarily just 2 officers in that unit, and we had a whole bunch of construction men, iron workers, bosun mates, gunners mates, and our job was to we mobilized. We supported a beachhead on an amphibious landing, and we had people that built piers. We had people that did metal work. We had bulldozer drivers, utility men. So basically, our job was to go and support the beach at an amphibious landing. What we did is about once a quarter we went out to Little Creek, which is out part of just south of Norfolk, out there, and did exercises there on the beach and did things. We built elevated piers. We built other things, and we did beach defense exercises. It was a fun unit, but it felt a lot like I was in the Army. We camped out, we wore fatigues, and we did that. And you slept in the sand and did that. And I said, I wanted to sleep in the dirt. I said I would have joined the Army, but But anyways, but it was a fun thing. And I ended up becoming the commander of that unit, and I was CO of the FIB CB unit for a couple of years and did that. And then the reserve, you have to move around a lot, so you can't call what's called homesteading. People get into one thing and they do that for the rest of their career, and they discourage that. So I went on and had an opportunity I took on. I had an opportunity to be the commanding officer of the destroyer squadron staff unit, which is about 6 people. And our job was to go support a destroyer squadron in Norfolk staff unit. That was kind of fun doing that. And then the best thing I did was I got into the NATO unit, which was it was the most elite unit at our reserve center. It's Supreme Allied Command Atlantic. In NATO, at the time when NATO was developed after World War II, there was two major commands of NATO. Commander-in-Chief SAC-EUR, which was a general that commanded all the forces in Europe, and then the SAC-LANT, which was a Navy command that commanded all the seagoing and the ship units in the Atlantic. So SAC-LANT was charged with keeping the sea lanes open, and that was the bridge to Europe. So, and the original intent of SAC-LANT was to protect the shipping routes from the United States to Europe and to keep the shipping lanes open. And they're headquartered in Norfolk, so I became part of SAC-LANT, and that was just a great thing. The unit frequently went to Brussels, Belgium, for that. Unfortunately, I never really had an opportunity to get to Belgium. I was still too junior, and the opportunities just weren't there to do that, what I was doing. However, I did do a lot of operations in Norfolk at the headquarters, did that out there, and took part in that. And then that's when I finally got into public affairs in NATO. I started poking around, and I talked to the NATO public affairs people, and I found people that give me, okay, I gotta get over into the public affairs area now. And so finally they helped me transfer into public affairs. So when I became a public affairs officer, I went into the public affairs community. So I then went to Great Lakes down there, and I worked in a public affairs unit at Great Lakes, and it's called the Navy Information Bureau Chicago. So I was involved with that, and it was a media training unit. It was a great. We went all around the fleet. We trained admirals, generals, high-level staff people in media relations. We just had a blast doing that. And then finally I was doing what I wanted to do in the first place in the Navy, and it took about 10, 12 years to get there. But I finally found my calling in public affairs, and I was ended up becoming executive officer of the unit in Great Lakes that went around and did media training. It was just an awesome job. I loved doing it. And then after that, there was an opening again back in NATO for the public affairs officer in NATO. So I came back to the unit in Battle Creek and became the public affairs officer of that unit back in Battle Creek. And that was just a great job being a part of that, telling the story of NATO, telling the story of the Navy, doing that. But the one thing I did get to do during that time as being the public affairs officer there is I did an exercise in Stavanger, Norway, and I led a media team that did a week-long event training. At the time, it was really interesting because we're an American public affairs team going to Norway to train Canadian officers going to Afghanistan. I can't get more NATO than that. So we were there for a week training basically the equivalent of the Chief of Navy Information in Canada, which at that time was a commander, and his people doing their public affairs work. And we're getting ready for this exercise, but the public affairs officers that we trained in Norway were part of what's called ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force, that were going to Afghanistan. And this Canadian team was going to be there doing all the public affairs work for it was actually Afghanistan's first free election following the operations we had in Afghanistan. And so it's kind of cool that we took part in training the very first people that went there to do the public affairs work for in Afghanistan for now the new provincial government, which is really interesting. So that was an exciting trip. So we got to do some pretty interesting things and take in a lot of really great events as a public affairs officer. Then I came back and worked with NATO and all that here in Battle Creek, and I also was the collateral public affairs officer at the Navy Reserve Center. So I worked in my own community doing public affairs work and doing Navy work here in the community and trying to raise the awareness. Because Battle Creek, where we live here, is a huge military town. We have Fort Custer, which was one of the largest training bases in World War I and World War II. We have the Army National Guard here. We have the Air National Guard, huge Air National Guard here. We have a great Marine Corps contingent here. We have the Federal Center, and we also have the Navy Reserve here, but not many people know there's a Navy here, so my challenge here was convincing my own hometown that there's a Navy in their own hometown, which was kind of continual challenge, so that was a lot of fun doing that. So I got involved in a lot of the military affairs here in the own community doing that, and really enjoyed my time as a public affairs officer and doing the work here, and that's it. I'll tell you, public affairs was an exciting time to come in. The information age was just taking off, and it has grown by leaps and bounds. A lot of times people think of Navy public affairs, they think, well, that's part of recruiting, or you're doing that, you're just marketing. The Navy. No, we're doing a lot more than marketing. We're telling the Navy story. We're telling people what they have to know about that. In a free society, we can't, we have to be transparent in what we do. We're superior, but still we have to be transparent with the American people and all that. So, public affairs. What's interesting is the last few spokesmen for the White House right now, Admiral Kirby. Admiral Kirby was a public affairs admiral in Desert Storm over in Iraq. Before him, Admiral Braithwaite was became the chief of the Secretary of the Navy. So public affairs officers really grown in stature. They've really came out of the shadows of being these little forgotten, people that were considered propagandists back, 30, 40 years ago, and it's become really a great profession. So that's kind of my story. I've been involved a lot here. Presently, I can tell you a little bit about the Commanders Club of Michigan. When I came back to Michigan and I was serving in the reserve here, I found out about an organization that's based in Lansing called the Commanders Club of Michigan. And it was a Navy organization, and I looked into it, and somebody brought me to it. And the Commanders Club of Michigan is the predecessor or the successor of the Michigan Naval Militia. For our history, if you go back to the time that we were forming as a state, states had their militias. The state militia was formed to protect the state. Michigan had both a land militia and a naval militia. And the naval militia was basically anybody that owned a boat. In the time they owned that, or anybody connected with maritime, or any Navy veterans that became part of the Michigan militia back in the 120, 150 years ago when the state was forming. So, so we had a bona fide in our pioneer days here. We had a Navy militia and we had a land militia, and as things went on and developed, we became a state, and then eventually the land militia became incorporated in what's called the National Guard. So all the Army and the land militia, in fact the Army militia was what went to Washington to protect the Capitol in the Civil War. But anyways, the land militia was around the turn of the century, was rolled into the National Guard. But the Navy militia became federalized and became part of the Navy Reserve. So we went from this kind of a ragtag Navy militia became part of the Navy Reserve, so it fell into the Navy Reserve. So the Navy became federalized. So we see here we have National Guard here, which is part of the state, but the Navy here has always been federal. So it's we're part of the Navy Reserve is federal. So there's kind of distinction between the two. But that's the Commanders Club. But now in the 1960s, the governor of Michigan, Governor Swainson, who was a World War II veteran and actually recovered in Battle Creek at the Percy Jones Army Hospital, which is now the Federal Center, what became governor of Michigan. And he was one day looking through and we still had in the Michigan Constitution authorization for Navy militia, which didn't exist anymore. He says, well, what do we do about this? Do we take it off the books or do we do something with it? So what they did is they put together a bill and they rolled what was then the Navy militia into an honorary organization, and it was called the Commanders Club of Michigan, which was a maritime organization for support of maritime interests in Michigan under the auspices of the Adjutant General. So I'm now a member of the Commanders Club of Michigan as a volunteer. Technically the Navy militia, but we don't do anything militia work. We do more advocacy. We do more for the maritime services in Michigan. We do honorary things, and it's a great organization doing some good things. And so we are the successor of the Michigan Naval Militia, doing the work of promoting maritime interests in Michigan. And when I say maritime interest in Michigan, Michigan is a fantastic state, and a lot of people don't realize how much of a maritime state Michigan is. You know, when they think of Michigan, we've had Air Force bases here, we have Army armories all over the state, we have Air National Guard facilities, but we also have run 4 of the 5 Great Lakes, and we have a huge role in Great Lakes shipping here as a maritime state, and we have a huge Coast Guard presence. People don't realize that Michigan is a Coast Guard state. Michigan hosts half of all the Coast Guard facilities in the Great Lakes. We also have both of the Coast Guard air stations in Detroit and Traverse City in the Great Lakes. So we are a huge military state. Navy still plays a part of it. There's really no active duty military or active duty Navy in Michigan anymore. We do have several reserve centers. The Reserve Center in Battle Creek recently grew about 10 years ago. They rolled in the reserve centers from Lansing and Grand Rapids to Battle Creek because we have the Fort Custer base here. Battle Creek still remains a huge military town. Navy is still part of it, and I've been proud to be part of it, and just doing a lot of things to help promote the Navy and maritime interest in Michigan. So that's kind of my story, and I thank you for your time, and I thank those who have served before me. So, well, thank you.
Yeah, we thank you, TR. I have just a couple follow-up questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
There was, what is flank speed? I remember you talked about that a little bit. What exactly is
flank
that?
speed is the top speed of the ship. Flank speed would be usually up to about 30 knots.
Mm-hmm.
You have full speed, flank speed. Flank would be the fastest speed the ship could go.
Okay.
So it would be, say full speed ahead or flank speed. Flank would be the fastest you could get the ship to go. Usually beyond full speed. It's usually.
That was an aircraft carrier going 30 knots. That was hauling.
Yeah. It is. And it shakes a little bit too when you go that fast. That's a lot of weight going through the water. 96,000 tons.
I would hate to have seen the wake behind that at 30 knots.
Yeah.
That was probably a small tsunami.
Yeah, it is amazing.
Now, were you the first person in your family to join? Did your did your mom, dad, aunts, uncles?
My family, I've had I had 2 uncles that were in World War II. Both of them served in the Army as enlisted. My father served in the Air National Guard briefly, all that, and I'm the first actual. I had an uncle that was a Navy supply officer for a few years and did that, but I was the only one that went on and was I'm the highest ranking member of my family that served, but been about 6 of us that have served in the military in some capacity.
Awesome. So were they then, I'm guessing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing they were supportive then of your service, correct?
Oh yeah, that was like, people that thought it's a good thing. Even during during the Vietnam era when I was post-Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
but during that time they were still pro-military, and it was a thing to do and all that. And it was interesting to talk about Vietnam. I came in at post-Vietnam, but the people I served with, especially some of the senior people, were pretty haggard, say Vietnam veterans.
Mhm.
The commanding officer of my ship was an F-4 pilot in Vietnam, highly decorated. Admiral Cluxton, he flew A-4s in Vietnam, or F-4s, and I stood a watch one night with a warrant officer who was a boat coxswain who drove river boats up and down the Mekong River under fire. He was probably maybe in his 50s, but he looked like he was about 80. I mean, it was just, and a lot of these people, I mean, I served with so many senior people that had Vietnam stories, and it was like my career was beginning, the Vietnam career was ending, and there were some really interesting stories of people, and he was talking about getting shot at on the river up there, and running that boat up and down. Every run was perilous as they did.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up, because it's one of the things that I like to try to explain to people, right, is we have this hyperfixation, take Vietnam for example, 65, which we know it was actually 1960, we started sending advisors, but combatant troops went 65, so most people see 65 to 73.
Right.
That didn't start at 65 and it didn't end in 73, and even if you didn't serve during Vietnam, you were still impacted by the Vietnam service, because your entire leadership, or most of them, had been there. So their experiences and their passing on wisdom came from that experience that they had.
That's right.
And it's that legacy effect that one particular war can, and then like you said, which is interesting as well, you brought up the war on terror in the 1980s.
Right.
And I don't think that's on, at least no one that I know of, is radar. Everyone seems to think War on Terror 2001, and a lot of people don't even realize that wasn't even the first attack on the Twin Towers, right?
No, that wasn't. In fact, the first couple of attacks were in Africa, and actually this it really didn't wake up until Lebanon and the Beirut bombing. I think that was what woke everybody up, and that was massive. 222 Marines.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting, we had a Marine detachment on our ship, and the XO of our Marine was a real gung-ho Marine, and he was just crawling to go ashore. He wanted to go ashore, and he wanted to be there, and they wouldn't let him go. He was just crawling out of his skin trying to get ashore. He would have swam if he had to. I mean, it was interesting that
We're different, right? Marines are just different. I mean, listening to you talk about this story, I'm getting goosebumps over here, sitting like, I want to go ashore. I want 40 years later, I want to go get them.
I got another good story too. My reserve career, so I was with Fid CB, and we went to Little Creek there, and at the time I went to Little Creek, there was an LDO lieutenant, limited duty officer, named Mike Thornton. And Mike Thornton was a Vietnam veteran. He was a Medal of Honor recipient, and at the time he was the only Medal of Honor recipient on active duty. And just a great guy, but he was the Bravo Company commander at Little Creek, which ran the boats there and all that. And it was his twilight tour. I mean, he retired from that there after 30-some years in the Navy and through Vietnam and all that. But what was interesting about him is that I got to know him, and kind of interesting to know a Medal of Honor recipient, but he was a Navy SEAL, and he got it as a SEAL, and his story is just fascinating. And if you ever get a chance to go to the Navy SEAL Museum in Fort Pierce, Florida, he's all over that, because he was one of the time, I think there might be a few more now, but he's only one of 5 SEALs to have a Medal of Honor. And 2 of the Navy SEALs, there's a statue outside of the museum. It's called Swim Buddies. And what it is, it's himself and his captain, or his commander, lieutenant that he served with. And they were on a mission in somewhere in Vietnam. They went ashore with a group of Vietnamese, called them, their equivalent of SEALs, and they let a team in they were looking for POWs, and anyways, they got dropped off on a raft and went ashore, and they didn't land in the right place, and they went in and they came under fire, and I mean very under heavy fire. And the captain, Tommy, I can't remember his name. But anyways, his lieutenant was hit and shot, and they retreated. And Thornton took the rest of the crew back to the boat that they got and sent them back to sea. And he says, "I'm going back." And the boat went back to their ship out at sea. And Thornton went back in to find him, and he found him still alive, under fire, and literally carried him out of the jungle into the beach. Well, the boat was gone, so he inflated his life jacket, put it on him, and he swam him 2.5 miles out to sea while treating him and getting him out. And he really saved his life and brought him back under fire. And what was interesting is that the statue is a statue of him carrying him, but both of them are Medal of Honor recipients. And the other, his commander actually had, before that, I don't know if I got the whole story straight, but was doing another mission where he got wounded and evacuated while trying to recover POWs, and went to Bethesda, and it was in Bethesda. Well, that was during the time between their incident and him getting the Medal of Honor. And the day of his, he got his Medal of Honor at that time. It was from President Nixon. Thornton, his skipper, the guy he rescued, who hadn't gotten his Medal of Honor yet, they wouldn't let him come to the ceremony, because he was still recovering in the hospital. And he said, "I'm not going to have that." And so he snuck into the hospital, grabbed him out of the bed, and carried him to the ceremony, and put him down at the ceremony, he says. So he rescued him twice. And the second, so that was kind of like legendary, the fact he literally stole him from the hospital to take him to his Medal of Honor ceremony. I mean, there's just stories like that. But anyways, the statue, both of them, eventually he got his Medal of Honor for his incident. So there's 2 Medal of Honor winners, or recipients, in the statue outside the Navy SEAL Museum. One is Thornton carrying Tommy, I can't remember, Tommy Norris, I think was his name. Yeah, Tommy Norris. And that's the big statue outside of him. Both of them are recognized along with other Navy SEALs in the SEAL Museum. But he was just a great guy. And you see him, I still see him, because he's every year, I think he lives in Indiana, but he is one of the recognized people at the Indianapolis 500. When they do the opening ceremonies there, they recognize the military and they do all that. And he's one of like 3 or 4 Medal of Honor recipients that they recognize there. So every year I see him on TV at the Indy 500, which is kind of neat. But it's an amazing story. He was probably the most interesting person I met at the SEAL community. So if anybody ever gets a chance, the Navy SEAL Museum in Fort Pierce, Florida is a must-see. I mean, it's just make you proud to be an American to go through that place and the thing they have.
I'll add it to my bucket list.
Yeah. One of the things they've got in there is they've got the lifeboat from the Maersk, Alabama. It still has the bullet holes in it.
Okay.
When they got rescued Captain Phillip, that's in there. They have shows all their toys and all their. But they do have a captured ISIS flag on display there. And if you read about it, it explains what the flag is and how they captured it. And then at the bottom it says that this flag is flown upside down to show disrespect. Which is it's interesting.
You mentioned OCS, which is Officer Candidate School.
Right.
Obviously, I was enlisted, so maybe could you possibly walk us through what goes on in OCS?
OCS is it's kind of a bridge between civilian and military. It's where you get your commission. It's a 16-week program, and what's interesting about OCS is it was okay. They try to break you from civilian and military, but the thing with OCS is that the class is a mixture of people from the fleet. You have some really hot running, enlisted people that got an opportunity to go through OCS and get commissioned. And everyone in there is a college graduate. So we're all, want to say, smart people. So it's not like you're gonna, have a gunny scream and holler at us like you do. But we do have, so the senior class, there's two classes, or a junior class and a senior class. And the senior class acts as the drill instructor, and they do, all your basic military stuff, fallout, they do a little screaming and hollering at you and all that. It's only for a week. They're like a hell week, basically. And then after that, it's more of a school, and you go through that, and you have a routine classes, and you it's classroom work after that, and then you go through the junior, then you become a senior, and then at 8 weeks, and then after that, if you've passed everything, you cover, in 16 weeks, you cover about 30 courses. So it's an intense academic program, some physical, some, the first part you gotta do a little of that, screaming and hollering, but for the most part, OCS was a very academic and very intense. They had to study, they had to, use your flashlight at night, and study late in the night if you had to, doing that. And you had to really learn how to budget your time and really.
Did you guys have any funny moments happen? Like, I think of, again, I know it's an enlisted side, so I think of some of the times the DI was screaming at us, or having some recruit do something really just dumb and off the wall because they could. Did they ever mess with you guys like that at all?
Oh yeah. Well, the first week, they follow your room, and you stand there, they drill you with questions and things like that. You have to, shout them back to them and all that. Well, toward the end of it, you're at the end, they start asking really stupid questions. And this guy gets in your face and asks who the captain of the longboat was, and things like that, and it's like, sir, Captain Merrill Stewian, sir. And it was like, and you're all trying not to laugh, and somebody starts laughing, they start chewing you out, and you're trying to hold back a laugh. And so they're just messing with you at this point. And it was, you ended up having fun after that. And that was just, just got into some really, questions about Star Trek and things like that. They started doing like that. And people were trying not to laugh and trying not to,
test that bearing a little bit.
Yeah, it got to be fun to do stuff like that.
Did any of your instructors have a lasting impact on you where you remember them today at all?
Yeah, I had one. You talk about. Throughout the Navy, when I found out, and I didn't realize, you have super enlisted who are given commissions. They're called limited duty officers, or LDOs, and it's called limited duty officer. Means they get a commission in their field, like if a navigator or a navigator like that would be not an officer, but he can only work in the navigation field. And I had one LDO who was there who was really good. I mean, he was good with navigation. I was struggling with that, so he took me aside. And one day during lunch, he said, "Yeah, come on over to my office." So he took me to his office and explained, some of these things like maneuvering board and how you do this and that. And he really took me under his wing and did that. And it was really gave me a lot of respect for these LDOs. That it was interesting because these are super enlisted that became officers, and they love to pick on real officers, and all that, and they had like they tell you, yeah, he says, so I got my commission the hard way, I earned it, come on, and say something like that, so we referred to it as LDO, meant loud, dumb, and obnoxious, but but anyway, but some of them were really good, and it was really. In fact, there was one LDO he was a lieutenant commander, and he was the ordnance officer on the Eisenhower, and he had been a hard train, he'd been all through Vietnam like that, and he got all the way up through E9, and then he got commissioned. And when he got commissioned, he had enough time. They made him an O2 when he was commissioned, so he was. He was very proud of the fact, especially with ensigns. He said, "Yep, I've held every rank in the Navy but ensign." So it was like, they were great guys, though. I mean, they were just they were really good at what they did, and I was really I mean, you know, they picked on you a little bit and all that because they're pretty proud of it. They're called Mustangs, and they were collectively they were Mustangs because they were LDOs, and they were, you know, picked because they were so good at what they did. They gave them a commission, but they were limited in what they could do. Kind of like warrant officers. And warrant is another path for, it's like, let's say, super enlisted that become warrant officers that, you know, limited in what they do.
Yeah, I think for the Marine Corps it was like E5. And if you were a standout Marine, you could then, if you chose, could go officer. You could go the Mustang route and go through OCS and then become an officer, or you could go the warrant route. And that, I remember those. What might have been for you the hardest part of adjusting to military life?
Hardest part I had, well, when we went to sea, I mean, we had the routines that you did, but it was just being away from everything. And for me, because I was at sea during the early 80s, and what we were seeing at the time, you know, in the early 80s, things were booming, you know, under the roaring 80s, you know, all this, and there was times I just felt I was missing out on what was going on in the rest of the world. And, you know, and sometimes I questioned what I was doing, you know, here, am I really, you know, is this really what I should be doing? And you see people, you know, people were making money in the markets, people were doing, you know, things were, the cell phone was being developed, I mean, just things were exploding in the 80s, and the technology and everything else. And there's just times where you felt like you were missing out on life sometimes with being out there, being isolated. And that was, to me, that was a hard adjustment. I guess you could call it being homesick in a lot of ways, because there's things that, God, I would be doing. I need, you know, I can hear about things, and you know, we should be taking part in doing something like this, or I should be doing this or that. But I'm here, you know, I'm doing this, and that was hard sometimes to realize what you're doing, something you're special, and all that. But so that was the hardest part of, you know, just separating, you know, let's say the real world from what we were doing, you know. And that was for me, that was hard, the isolation. Of course, in the 80s, we still didn't have the internet. You know, let's see, we didn't have a whole lot of communication. We didn't have a whole lot of, you know, I mean, literally we got our news still over the teletype. You go down to the ops center and you can read the boards and read through the news, you know. Literally had a notebook or they just like, you know, news stories, and you read through, this is what's going on in the world, and like that. And that was our connection, you know, and I mean, that was pre-internet.
Were you still worried about the Russians in the 80s?
Yeah, the Russians, yeah, that was a big part of the Russian threat. And that was one of the courses of studies we had, was Russian threat. And I had to learn all about the Russian fleet and that. That was, and they were, but at the time though, it was still kind of, they weren't real, I mean, you saw their ships, and you're out there at sea, they're old, rusty, and you always wondered, you know, is this really the threat that, you know, we think it is? We always had a Russian with us. We had a tattletale, and we actually got to the point where we plotted them on our formations because we were, you know, there's always been a Krivac out there, and we know it's been there, we know what it is, and you know, it's like, in fact, they even get to the point where, you know, probably the skipper gets briefed on their crew, you know, who their skipper is, all this stuff. I'm sure it's, but it was, but they'd play cat and mouse games with us, you know. I remember one time we were on the bridge, and what's interesting in a carrier, when you turn they have to launch into the wind when they launch aircraft, and of course they know that, and so they would position themselves to know that, and they can just listen to the radio and know when we're going to launch airplanes. So when we turned into the wind, that ship is right dead ahead of us, and he put up his breakdown lights. And like that, and then we know he's just screwing with us. So we're up there, and captain's, and I was conning the ship at the time. We turned, and I said, Captain, I said, Krivac is red over red. And I said, we need to come right. He says, hold your course. And Captain, I said, he's at 2,000 yards. I says, we need to maneuver. He said, hold your course, damn it. And we're all starting to sweat. And the captain finally looks up and grabs the binoculars and sees smoke on the stack, and it takes off as we got closer. And he's damn Russians. He called it. It was like, we're all just like, whoa. It's like, you know, that's the kind of stuff they played with us, you know. It was just things like that.
And he was the one that was in Vietnam too.
Yeah. Right.
So he already had that Salt Lord actual attitude
yeah.
anyways. He's already seen it. So he's like, you want to go to war with us? Let's go.
Yeah.
You know?
And he was like, you know, it was like, we're all just like sweating bullets up there, you know.
You guys never seen combat. You're going,
it's
you're
like,
charging a Russian warship?
So, you know, we're gonna collide with this guy, you know, and it's like, he's got red over red, and we're gonna, you know, we're obligated to move, you know. He called their bluff. And it was like, he just knew. I mean, it was like, you know,
he's been there before, so this is nothing new to him. Huh. Yeah, because I was a little different. I went across the Pacific and stuff like that, but yeah, that was just, it would be interesting to have a threat like the Russians out there like that, always just watching you.
Yeah, and it was just, and then of course the aircraft too, you had the Bears that were flying all over the map, you know, the big, looks like a B-52 with props and all that, and there was one time, the skipper, he had a fit. It was, they went out and they chased him, and they'd go up and they'd fly fresh, take pictures and do all that. And so they chased this bear, you know, like that, and then it turned and went back, and then our planes came back to deck, and about an hour later, the bear came back, and the captain picks up the binoculars and looks up and calls him up. He said, "That damn, there's a bear out here like that." And they came back and nobody caught it, and he was hot. And it was just one of those things that, you know, the captain saw it come back, you know, after we'd broken off engagement, and it went on, you know. Just things like that were just like, you know, the Russians, and it was all basically cat and mouse games. It wasn't really, you know, nothing, you know.
How did you feel in 1989 then when the Soviet Union collapsed? Here during your first, you know, during your active time in the Navy, your enemy was the Russians. I mean, you were off doing things in Beirut. Sure, you had Desert Storm maybe popping off eventually. But your enemy was Russia.
I don't think it was unexpected, because you were just looking at their fleet and looking at the condition of their craft, though. I mean, it just is, and everything we read about, everything, the intelligence, that they were struggling with everything, and I didn't think that they could sustain what they threatened. Their threat, they could be sustained, and I just think it was, like, it was a good thing it broke up. And it was like when they, you know, and they tore down the Berlin Wall. That was a great day. I mean, it was Reagan. There's a documentary when they're talking about it, you know, and how Reagan, you know, stood there and uttered those four. So that forward hammer blow, tear down these walls, you know, that was like one of the most powerful, you know, way he said it. And
did it feel like a victory for you?
A little bit in that we were, but Russia today is just, it's dangerous, and I don't know what, you know, you've got Putin is, I haven't quite figured him out. I mean, I'm not sure why he's destroying Ukraine for what, and like why, you know, and also I'm just disappointed that we didn't support Ukraine earlier on, but, you know.
He's definitely got similarities to other Russian leaders that aren't exactly good in history.
Yeah.
Stalin.
Oh yeah.
You know. So, well, let's speed forward a little bit. So you get into the 90s and the early 2000s, and now I'm guessing you correct me if I'm wrong, but your world has to have ended in 2001, September 11th. I mean, you went from, you know, active duty in the Navy, fighting the Russians. The wall comes down. You feel like you're almost at peace in the 90s. I mean, there's spot wars, but no one's really a threat to us. And then your homeland is now attacked.
Well, 9/11 at the time was, in fact, that happened just before a drill weekend here. So our drill weekend that weekend, we moved out of the base. Actually, we moved to the hotel downtown. We all met in a hotel. Didn't even go to the center because we didn't know what was up. And when we were under attack, or the nation was under attack, or whatever. So. And then the hard part about that is that, and what bothered me the most about that is that our response to it. I mean, we, of course, we deployed. All of us in the reserve expected to be called up. We got to fight this. We're going to be called up, and people wanted to be called up. I mean, there were people who were begging to go. I want to go fight. I mean, we got to fight this. And it was just, and that was the hardest part is that we'll just wait and we'll see what transforms out. And then what they did at the time, which bothered me, is they handpicked people to go. And they recalled certain people for certain things instead of taking units and groups. And after that, the people that didn't get selected to go left. It says, you don't need me in war, you don't need me in peace. And that was what that did to morale in some ways. We'd been better off if we just recalled units and sent them, even if not everybody was needed. I think from a psyche standpoint, that was just a bad move when they did that. That was just one of the things that came out of that bothered me.
So after your service ends, which was 2006, right? You said?
2005. Yeah.
2005. Sorry about that. How was it adjusting back to civilian life?
Well, it wasn't hard because I was reserved, so it was more of a.
Kind of already had your toes.
Yeah, I came back when I came off active duty. I went back to college. I ran a funeral home. I was a funeral director. We had our family funeral home, so I had a job. I was busy, and that was just something I did. It was almost like a dual career. And when I retired, then I was relieved, and now I can just concentrate on doing my job and not have to worry about next weekend and this and that, what I got to do. So it wasn't hard at all. I mean, it was like, I don't say I was glad it was over, but I would have stayed longer if I could. I mean, it was working, I can do both, but I got the point when you've done your time, it's time to go, and that's why I got involved in things like the Legion, the Commanders Club, and I was with the Navy League for a while and did that, so, and wear my hat when I can,
I wear mine all the time too.
Yeah,
I do it more for really for the Vietnam veterans, for gentlemen like yourself, is like a salute to your guys' service. I can be proud and show that I was in the service because you guys had to weather, especially Vietnam veterans had to weather a horrible return.
Well, part of the two, I was a funeral director for 30 years too, and I buried a lot of veterans and did a lot. That was always, when we had a veteran funeral, I was very meticulous on how we did it and made sure we did it right. And that was, a lot of people just that weren't veterans that did that just treated like everybody else. But it was usually when we had a veteran funeral, it was something special and something I worked hard to do well. And that was kind of continued service, I want to say, for doing that. And I was very, made sure all the details were correct and doing things right. And, and even it was interesting, being a funeral too, is we had it essentially because there were people that, even though they were veterans, they didn't want anything fancy, they didn't want anything to do with it, and all that. And then there were some that they brought in their discharge papers. You had families that had no idea of what their loved one did. And I'm looking at this stuff because I know what this is at. And I'm looking at these people, where he was and what he did. And they had no idea. Because, they came, especially World War II, they came home, they threw it in a drawer and went on and did that. And it was pretty spectacular things that they did and all this. And the family never knew because they never talked about it. And that was always sad because I saw so many people. I even had, some of my grandparents' friends who I never even knew they served. And until when they died, and I looked at their papers, and oh my God, I wish I'd known this, and it was and they were I did my job, I went to war, and they came home, and there were so many of those that we lost that just could have had tremendous stories and tremendous.
It's one of the reasons why I do this.
Right.
I a lot of guys and girls will ask me, well, I didn't do nothing special, and I was like, it might not seem special to you, but you got to think of your descendants. You got to think of the next generation coming along. It could seem special. I did the research for Gunny Chang, which was my wife's grandfather. He died in '95. My wife didn't know nothing of him. Loved her grandfather, but didn't know nothing of his service. And come to find out, the guy had decorations, presidential citations from Korea and Vietnam. No Purple Heart, but a combat action ribbon.
Wow.
So meaning that he's been in combat in both Korea and Vietnam and didn't get shot.
Yeah.
Which is just, I want to say he's probably less than 10% of people can say that.
Yeah.
You know.
I know, and it just was like, man.
I would love to hear what he had to say. What was his story like? What was that experience? And I'm so grateful for the Veteran History Project today that allows us to sit down and talk about these things. To hear from yours as an officer. I mean, we could have served on the exact same ship as an enlisted and an officer, and our stories would be night and day different. You know.
Yeah, you talked with Sam Gray. He was
Yep.
He was an aviator too.
Yep.
He was in that, so he was on the ship too. So.
Yeah, he talks about similar times of the bears coming out. That's why I wanted to bring up the Russians, and what was your take? Okay, he saw it from his side where he was on the working on the maintenance of ships and what everyone was doing. What was the officers like up in the tower? What were you doing? The commanders getting pissed because the bears coming back and you guys didn't scare it away. Shit, gotta go back out there.
Yeah. It's amazing things that happened and just.
Looking back at it now, you go, wow, it was a crazy experience.
Yeah.
I listened into yours. You walked 40 years after it happened on probably some of what I would say military-wise for America is some of our holiest ground, D-Day.
Yeah.
And you were on the beach on the day it happened. I mean, what was going through your head at that point?
Yeah, it was like, wow, and that was like, it was just sobering because, you think about what happened. And what was interesting is the ship to educate, we had all these young kids on the ship, but they showed the longest day, and it was like, for like days in advance, so everybody got to see that movie, so they kind of knew what it was all about. But my feel, I walked to the beach, it was like, you think about the pictures and you see what happened there, and I had the feeling that if I just dug into the sand, I'd find blood, and it was like, I just didn't want to do that, it was like, I said, man, the amount of bloodshed on this beach we had, the amount of people who died here, and as you felt, it was like you felt the ghosts of that when you walked there, like this was holy ground, it was just, you go up the Point du Hoc up there where they scaled it, and just look over, oh my, how the heck did they do that, I mean, it was just sobering, the whole thing, so.
It's a little different than what Hollywood paints it. It's not such severe cliffs from my understanding. Again, I've never personally been there, but again, it's still enough where, as a machine gunner like myself, I think of like the German defenders, and I would have been like, these guys must have been thinking we were insane. Because it's pretty wide open, flat beach. It's not real rocky. There's not much to hide behind, and you're just coming ashore with all these people.
And a handful, and swimming to get there, and then with all their stuff, some of them didn't quite, land all the way, stepped off, sunk,
And then, like on the back of your brain, or back of your mind, you got to still be thinking like we're in the Cold War still. This is still 1980s. We're still fighting Russia. So really, did World War II really end? Because the Cold War almost immediately started right afterwards. So did the World War II? Are we still in World War II? Is this war still being fought right now? That's always going on too.
Somebody once kind of they joked about it, Japan really rose, everything was made in Japan, and Japan's become, an industrial nation and all that. Somebody said, that event on the Missouri didn't end the war, that was a ceasefire, because they ended up winning 20 years later with, building everything and, commerce and all that, so.
The benefit of not having to pay for a DoD budget, when the American government comes along and says, Japan, you guys can't have no military, we'll be your military. Well, I can put all that money over.
It's sad what we did to like the Japanese Americans.
Oh, but I want to get it clear. It's not the Holocaust, but outside of gas chambers and killing them, we did similar things that the Germans were doing to their enemies. They were locking them up. They were putting them in camps, putting them away from everybody else. They didn't want them around anything. We were using them for labor. Well, after you've been through your service, multiple different types of warfare, different enemies, different experiences in that. Has your feelings changed about war? I know you talked a little bit about Ukraine today, a little bit about Israel. As you see all this going on, what do you feel? What do you think is?
Well, I came from the era when Reagan was building, peace through strength was the buzzword, and I see today things that bother me. Maybe as I'm older, we have a lot of commanding officers being relieved for whatever causes, and usually it's something social or something. And I'm wondering, I'm a little leery of that. And it's hard for me to tell kids, yeah, go join the military, because I'm not sure of the leadership right now. And I think, that bothers me a little bit. That, and one of the things I've heard is that people are reluctant to take command right now in this environment because it's so, volatile that, you're always guilty until proven innocent, if you can prove yourself innocent on things. And I know people have been relieved. I know people that have been, for whatever, something that they couldn't control or something they couldn't do, and there's just an environment now where, is it really right to send, kids to do this stuff if we don't have the full backing? And when I see that, the veterans aren't being taken care of, being taken properly, that's problematic. And I said, so that's a hard time right now. I mean, the military is great, you should serve, you should do that, but I have a hard time pushing anybody into that right now, doing that. And it's an option, but when I see the leadership and I see, the decisions they make, like Afghanistan, I don't want to get political, but we need a strong leader who can,
Absolutely.
say enough is enough. And that was what happened in Afghanistan was just deplorable. I mean, it was just. And we armed the Taliban. What the heck? And how much? If you look at the figures of the stuff we left behind, and what we did, it was so wrong. And I just that's the leadership today that'd be hesitant to send my son and daughter to do that, But
again, I'm enlisted, and I hate to hear it, but we are as strong as our officers, really.
right.
If your officer can't read a map to get you on target, to get you to where you need to be, it doesn't matter how far you are, how great or how accurate you are with your gun platforms or whatever your job is. If you can't get to where you need to do your job, then that's the job of the officer, So if your chain of command, if your leadership is young and new, essentially, you're destined to season them, and it's going to come through the failures. That was some of the issues that we had in Vietnam, right? We had a very young officer corps, very little combat experience, because the last combat was almost 20 years before that. And then what did we end up with? Well, we ended up with a bloodshed. And then towards the end of Vietnam, that officer corps got older, it got seasoned, and we started to see less casualties, but by that point, Vietnam was lost.
Well, during the 80s, at least you had the perspective of when, Colin Powell,
Mm-hmm.
who, when they made decisions, they understood Vietnam and what went wrong there. So there was more, Today we've gotten away from all that, and it's tough. We gotta have a strong military. We gotta have, we do that, and the world has just changed so much. Today, when you start, even just today with the thing with Microsoft, how vulnerable we are. And I think we're relying so much on technology now. And that scares me, that, the amount of technology that we're doing, the amount of,
When you put all your eggs in one basket, you are asking for trouble to happen. It's happened anytime that you look throughout history. When does a country start to have issues? When all of its eggs are pretty much in one area. It puts itself out there for vulnerability.
That's the old adage about during the space program when we were investing money into trying to develop a pen that would write in space, because of gravity and all that, and Russians were using pencils. It's like, so what, we kind of got to go back to basics sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I just, God, it just scares me that, you know, we're so reliant on this stuff. And, you know, the cyber world, cyber warfare now, it's just, that's a whole new frontier.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I understand all of it, but boy, I tell you, you turn off our internet and you're going to just, you know.
It'd be insane to see what this world would do if today Bluetooth, Wi-Fi gone, did not exist no more, you know?
Yeah.
I know you talked a little bit about the Commanders Club and you're wearing their shirt there, but do you attend reunions at all?
Yeah, I did a couple years ago. We had an Eisenhower Award-room reunion, and it was just a great time. I don't know if we'll be able to do it again, but commanding officer of the ship, in fact, Admiral Cluxton, who was the ship at the time, Captain Cluxton, he ended up becoming a 3-star admiral. He retired for 3 stars, so he was there. He's up in his upper 80s now, and then some of these other guys went on. We had a couple people that went on to be admirals and like that. So it was quite at the time. I mean, we had some superstars, both for the Air Wing. We had people who came like the, 4-star admirals. A couple people from our ship. One became the commander-in-chief of the Pacific. I mean, it was just an amazing era that those people went on and did great things. But the reunion, it was really hashing out some old stories. It was just, it was fun. We had a pretty close officer group in the wardroom there. And it was especially as younger ones. We had some good times. So that was good.
Awesome. One of my last questions for you, TR. You were talking right before we started. You're technically an 04,
right?
But you served as an 05, a commander essentially.
Right.
Could you kind of explain that a little bit?
In reserve, you could be placed in a billets, a pay grade above if you had. And I did. I just, I always thought that when I took command of one of the units, that was an 05 job. And I did, my public affairs job was an 05 job. So I actually did a couple of 05 jobs. So I just call myself commander because I did the job, whether or not they selected me. And that's another whole story. The whole selection process is flawed in some ways because not the best people get.
You're not telling me.
I'm just saying it's just, I'm not, and especially in the reserve. And in fact, the person who I found out later that who served on my selection board wasn't even involved in the community or did anything, and it was sad. It was just, we don't put our best.
I think that whole process of promotion that they have in the military, where they want you to become an NCO on the enlisted side, you have to go in front of these panels of basically your peers or your higher enlisted who may or may not have a grievance against you, and they get to decide whether or not you get your raise or not. You warrant that raise. That's why I got out with a good cookie as an E3.
Yeah. Well, what bothered me is I can't tell you how many times my guys, they took the advancement exam and 4 or 5 times it's called P&A, pass not advanced. So you keep taking this test, but then you don't get advanced, and then P&A's give up and they leave, and that was part of the morale thing. Mm-hmm. And if you're gonna, it's the way to keep people is to advance them.
Don't let them take the test unless there's a spot for them to get when they pass their exam. Yeah. It's just it's the reward process. Not you passed, great job, thank you, but you don't get the job.
Yep. So it's interesting. Even a friend of mine who's in the Commanders Club now is a captain. He retired as a captain, but he was selected for admiral. But for whatever reason, there was an investigation in his command about something, but he came time to retire, and his wife said you retire, and it says so he retired as a captain, and then about a month later he got notice he'd been cleared, but he'd already submitted his retirement papers, so he was selected for admiral but retired as a captain, things, and so had he taken it he would have been obligated for another 8 years, but it's just things like that, for an illustrious career you go that far and then that happens to you, and you got to make that decision. Do I stay or do I go? Do I wait? And just things like that all the time. And like me, I got to the point I was a lieutenant at the time, and I'd done my time, and I can go back to the reserve, this, and just stop beating my head against the wall here. I was in a bad command, and you know, hindsight's always 20/20, but you know, had I pursued public affairs at that time a little more harder, I might have had a different career, but it all worked out, you know. So.
Well, TR, as we conclude your oral history here, I do want to turn the microphone, so to speak, over to you and let you add anything if we happen to have missed anything. I know we've covered a lot over the last hour and a half here.
You got a lot to edit.
Yeah, a lot of work ahead of me. But yeah, if there's anything else you would like to add, maybe you'd want to put out there as like for future generations who will hear this, maybe a quick little message for them.
For future generations, hang in there. You know, we were part of 1% that serves now. You know, at any given time, what was it, like less than 20% during World War II, and then about less than 9% in Vietnam, and we're down to 1% of the population that serves. So if you do serve, you are in a elite group today, and there's a lot of benefits to it. I think it's gotten better. I think we've learned we got to take care of our troops. We've got to have quality of life has definitely improved. Places I've seen, you know, it was a huge sacrifice. You know, it is a sacrifice being away from family and friends. That'll always be the case. But it's a great profession and great. Even if it's not a profession, it's a great thing to do for a few years, and gives you a leg up in everything else in the world. So.
Well, thank you for that, TR, and I want to thank you for your service. Thank you for sitting down with me today. This has been very informative. I've learned a lot listening to you. I've learned a lot from all of my veterans. It's a very great process. So I just want to thank you for all of that.
Great. Well, good luck with this. This is cool.
Yeah. I'll